Pantheon Plus, a podcast where we go beyond tights and flights to explore other genres and movies from the past. Each month we'll have a theme. This month we look back at the Beverly Hills Cop trilogy. Each week we'll pick a movie related to that theme. This week we look at 1987's Beverly Hills Cop 2.
Eddie Murphy is Axel Foley.
Who is he?
I'd say he's a cop.
And the heat's back on in Beverly Hills.
It's all I can find! Does the steering wheel work in this thing? I'm steering! Do the brakes work? I haven't tried them yet!
Beverly Hills Cop 2.
Starts Wednesday at a selected theater near you.
My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5 star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at the real world are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so by following us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, 3 years after the first Beverly Hills Cop came Beverly Hills Cop 2, a movie with a very different feel because we have a different director in the chair this time. We go from Martin Brest, who is mostly known for comedies, to Tony Scott, who is mostly known for action movies. So this movie takes on a different tone than the first one. There are still some laughs, it's still funny, but there is definitely the action is definitely a lot better, and there's more of it.
Yeah, like right off the bat, they do this robbery, and it's so well done. I was surprised at how well done it was. From that point, it was like, okay, this is a totally different tone, and then by the time Axel Foley comes in, they're playing that line between drama and comedy really well, or action, crime, and comedy really well. So I like the way they played it down the line, and I love the way the movie opened up, and everything just kind of has that tone. Tony Scott, like, it's weird. I have these images in my head of all these different images from Tony Scott movies, but it turns out I've only seen clips of him on TV, because I've calculated, this is only the 4th Tony Scott movie I've ever seen. The other ones are Crimson Tide, Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, and True Romance. So, I mean, I guess I watched this movie 10 years ago, yeah, but still, like, it's weird because I thought I've seen so many Tony Scott movies because, like, him and Denzel are just like a 1-2 combo, right? And turns out I've just seen a bunch of clips online or online on YouTube or, I don't know. It's weird. I guess I have to do this marathon now, so I guess the Tony Scott marathon's on the way, but you could just tell, like, right off the bat, it's his style because I don't know, the way he kind of shoots certain scenes in LA, it's the way he did it was really good. The way he has like a color palette for every movie, and I know you can like attribute to what I'm saying because like it feels like every movie he comes up with a different color palette. This one it's very like a yellow orange kind of thing, and they even have that in the poster, and he used that in the background, like the sunset. He used a lot of sunsetting scenes, so he did a great job. I felt like it was a step up in the direction, definitely a step up in the plot, but even though it's still a kind of hokey European bad guy kind of thing going on, I mean, if you can get past that, it's almost as funny. I would say the comedy is I don't know, probably a step down, but that's only because they had this extra focus and more budget on the action. So they were kind of just, like I said, playing that line. But I think they played that line well, and I think they did a good job for a sequel. It's not as much of a classic as the original, but still, as a sequel, I think it did a good job. And I was quite surprised how well it held up.
Yeah, originally I went into this thinking that maybe Beverly Hills Cop 2 was even better than the first one. I don't necessarily believe that is the case, but I think what separates Beverly Hills Cop 2 from a lot of other comedy sequels is the fact that it's actually good. If you really look at the history of comedy and you look particularly at the sequels that have come out, you will realize that many of them are really bad. Think about Airplane 2, Caddyshack 2, Ted 2, The Hangover 2. A lot of twos that I'm bringing up. A lot of these movies are really bad, and there are a lot of reasons that that is possible, but I think one of the biggest ones is that it is really hard to capture lightning in a bottle, and especially with comedies, it is especially difficult to do that. And you can run down a long list as I just did, and you can also include the Ghostbusters 2 as well. I think the first Ghostbusters movie is one of my favorite movies of all time, and then the second Ghostbusters is pretty much an abomination. And I think that the change in tone is something that was probably worthwhile, even if the comedy wasn't as solid. The fact that we got something with more action and a little bit more drama, a little bit more plot, I think we ultimately ended up with something better, given the history of bad sequel comedies. And Brian, did you even realize just how many bad sequel comedies there are?
Yeah, and I mean, I've never seen any of the Police Academy movies, and I know people attest to those. At least the first three. It's like, go watch the first three at least, or something like that. So maybe one or two. I can't speak for the Police Academy, but I can speak for a lot of people that I take their opinions respectable for comedy. So you never know. I don't know if you see the Police Academy movies, but that's. I'm kind of on the fence on Ghostbusters too, but whatever, because I enjoyed it for what it is. But you can tell the first one is like a clearly better script. I'm trying to think. I've never seen Three Men and a Baby 2. um, but yeah, I totally get what you're saying because the first thing that came into my head immediately was Airplane 2, and so we were like on the same level. And that's not because, and this is me plugging your blog about your 100 faves, but you just put that article about Airplane in your list, so that's probably why we both thought of it. But I agree. It's something about successful first ones and then trying to recapture it the second time around. It's kind of that producer's kind of greed, that money grab kind of greed. In this case, they did the right thing because Top Gun came out a year before this, and Top Gun was a huge fucking hit. There's no doubt about it. I still haven't seen it, but I'm gonna watch it eventually as soon as somehow the sequel comes out sometime before that. But yeah, they picked him at the right time because he was hot off the bat of that. So it was the right choice, and I felt it was like the right pick. And I don't know if Eddie Murphy had something to do with that because he was very much a power player in this whole series of movies. But it wouldn't surprise me if he was like, okay, he watched Top Gun, he knows he was going to production for two, and he's like, let's get Tony Scott. And it totally set the tone because, like I said, that beginning really sets the tone with Brigitte Nielsen looking all like a badass and stuff like that. So credit to him for making that decision.
Brigitte Nielsen is someone that we could probably spend a great deal of time talking about because she is somebody who has kind of become a punchline with appearances on reality shows and whatnot. At one point, she was, of course, married to Sylvester Stallone, and there are rumors, which we don't really get into on this podcast, as far as when it comes to consensual relationships. That is not really something that concerns me, but there is a rumor that she possibly had an affair with both Eddie Murphy and Tony Scott on this movie, which is pretty remarkable, given the fact that there are three cheap shots taken at or definitely two kind of shots taken at Sylvester Stallone, with Taggart saying "fuck Rambo" at the end. Plus, there is, I believe, a poster of Sylvester Stallone from Cobra. So there's definitely some things going on, and it's especially worth pointing this out because, of course, Sylvester Stallone was originally supposed to be Axel Foley in the original Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah, that's everything I was thinking right there. Like every shot at Stallone, the poster in in Rosewood's room, everything like that, and then the casting of Brigitte Nielsen. I thought everything was kind of like not exactly like a total shot at him, but like it was just put in that situation where it's like, well, we got this and this. Let's just poke fun of it a little bit. Let's see if he enjoys it. Maybe he's a fan. Who knows? But it's probably like a friendly jab, nothing personal. I don't think because. I mean, I've never heard of a feud between Eddie Murphy and Sylvester Stallone. If they did, they probably would have did it on Celebrity Deathmatch.
A legendary show in its own right. So originally, Paramount wanted to produce a TV series of Beverly Hills Cop after the success of the first film. Eddie Murphy at that point did not want to go back into television, so a sequel was made instead. And I think that this shows you just how different the business is because 33 years later, there is a distinct possibility that Beverly Hills Cop would not even be a movie, that it would be a television series, and that someone of Eddie Murphy's caliber would probably be more inclined to do a TV series because he would get more money for doing an 8 to 10 episode series on Netflix, Apple, Amazon, or Hulu, as opposed to doing a mid-budget movie. So it's fascinating to point that out just for that reason alone.
Yeah, because let's face it, like anytime 80s, 90s, even going back to the 70s, they tried to do the sequel spin-off TV show from the movie. I think they did with Animal House, total flop. Turns out to be total flops a lot of the time. It's very rare that it actually becomes a hit. There's actually an interesting story with Mel Brooks and Blazing Saddles that I recently heard about how I forget which was it CB Paramount maybe I don't know whatever company that was no 20th Century Fox maybe. Basically, they wanted a sequel to Blazing Saddles, and Mel Brooks put in his contract the only way he would do it is with him, or they have to do it as a show first or something like that. So they produced a show in order for him to prevent him from doing the fucking movie. So there's like a secret Blazing Saddle show out there. Like I think 2 or 3 seasons they shot just to contractually have Mel Brooks on board for a Blazing Saddles 2 at any point, or anything to do with it. So that's the weird Hollywood contracts, the way they go. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was some kind of contract thing here where it was like, okay, if you don't come back to do a show for us, you have to do a sequel or some shit like that, or some kind of bullshit, because that's the way Hollywood was, or still is maybe. I don't know. There's some crazy contracts out there, and this wouldn't surprise me, but thank God they didn't do a show because, like I said, it would have been a flop, and yeah, I don't think Eddie Murphy would have done it. He probably would have been executive producer, and they would have recast him with someone else, and blah blah blah. You know the drill, and it would have ended up like Clueless. Yeah, that was a show too.
Well, a few years ago, I believe CBS did do a pilot for Beverly Hills Cop with Axel Foley's son. I guess Eddie Murphy may have even done a cameo appearance in that pilot, but of course, that pilot has not come to light, probably because it was really, really bad. But I think there is still a distinct possibility that this TV series could happen with with CBS and Paramount, the merger. I think there is a definite possibility. If there's a Beverly Hills Cop 4, my inclination is to say that there's going to be a spin-off TV series. So this conversation is not over. There is still a possibility that this could happen. Some other aspects of this film to note. Unfortunately, Bronson Pinchot was slated to reprise his role, but he was busy with his sitcom Perfect Strangers. It all comes back to Perfect Strangers, Brian. This is the best film, or this is the first film that Eddie Murphy is credited with having wrote or co-written. Of course, he is known for his improv on sets, so technically he has done some screenwriting, but this is definitely the point when Eddie Murphy has a lot more power in Hollywood, and he would extend this power to directing a movie just a couple of years later, and then that being his only directing, the only movie that he has ever directed because it was a giant flop.
Yeah, that's kind of the power that Eddie Murphy had, and yeah, it's kind of sad, unfortunately, because after this period, I would say after. Well, no, he still had a good 5, 6 years, and then I would say post Boomerang, maybe. I don't know, something 93, 94, right around when Cop 3 came out is when it kind of went a little downhill, but I thought he kind of had that resurrection in 99, I want to say, because to me, my favorite Eddie Murphy is Life and Bowfinger, like back to back. I think that was the same year. But those are two of my favorite Eddie Murphy movies for sure, and I love movies about making movies, so that's Bowfinger. So, Eddie Murphy deserved all the credit and all the writing credits he deserved. And, it shocks me that, something like the way he's worked on sets and in Hollywood and stuff like that and his improv, it's like, I don't know, how come Larry David or someone like that hasn't reached out, like a Christopher Guest? Something like that would be a really crazy crossover. You know what I mean? And even in terms of demos and graphics, you know what I'm saying? Because I think Eddie Murphy draws a different demographic than certain waiting for Guffman type films. You know what I'm saying? So, but that just seems to mesh with really well with their styles. I just can't believe they haven't done anything like that. But it is what it is. But I'm glad that the whole improv thing finally gets him some writing credit because there's probably a lot more that on set that happens and like I'm sure a lot of comedy sets and they just give the credit to the original writer because they don't want to have the bothering to make writing credits for other people.
Yeah, I'm sure that the guilds get involved in that kind of stuff. So at this point, Tony Scott wanted Hans Zimmer to score. Paramount wanted a named composer, so Harold Faltermeyer returned to do the score for Beverly Hills Cop. And Brian, all I can say is, 33 years later, I'll be honest, I have not heard who the latter is, but Hans Zimmer is someone that we've talked a lot about on this podcast, and it's pretty amazing to think that at one point he wasn't famous enough to do a sequel to Beverly Hills Cop.
Let's say I'm kind of glad because Hans Zimmer with a comedy score, or I mean, he's probably going to do the action part well, but just the comedy in the background, it would be so awkward because I don't even know what kind of music he would play. Imagine him redoing the Axel Foley theme, but like Hans Zimmer style, even for like 80s. You know what I mean? It would have been a little too epic for it. So I'm kind of glad they did that. But yeah, it's crazy. But I'm
I mean, he did the score for True Romance, and it sounds almost like you would not be able to tell that True Romance was scored by Hans Zimmer, given what you know about him.
I give you that. It's just I don't know. It just something doesn't mesh well, and then Eddie Murphy and Hans Zimmer is just kind of like salt and soda. You know what I mean? It's just like what the fuck. I don't know. Maybe it's just me because when I read that, I was just like, I totally get that vibe and why they kept it with the original guy. Because the soundtrack is still pretty. It's not as great as the original first soundtrack, but I still have fun listening to certain tracks. That Bob Seger track at the beginning is really good, and it was like I've heard this song before, and I never knew it came from Beverly Hills Cop 2. So the soundtrack's pretty good. I think there's another track oh, the James Ingram track. I'm a fan of James Ingram. He just recently passed away, so fan of R&B, and he had a really bumping track in this one too. So it had its good moments, but they wanted to make it familiar to the first one, and that was the point. And I guess like by doing so, it kind of allowed it to play that line again, like I said, between that action comedy. And I think the soundtrack needed to be more comedy than action in some parts of this movie.
This also was the movie debut of one Chris Rock. He was the valet at the Playboy Mansion who complains about Axel bringing in a cement truck. This is his very first role on the big screen. 34 years later, Brian, and we are going to get a Chris Rock Saw movie at some point, which I don't even know what to think about that.
Look, anytime you get a comedy guy that kind of transcends the genre, I feel like you got to start paying attention because I don't know. Bill Murray did it, you know what I mean? Adam Sandler did it. He goes back and forth, but a lot of comedy guys can't do it. And Chris Rock doing it this late in the game, you got to give it credit to him. But it was pretty hilarious to see him in that scene at the Playboy Mansion, and that Playboy Mansion scene is great in itself because it's just such a surreal timestamp of 1986, 87, the way everyone's dressed, the way I mean, you got Hugh Hefner there with the Playboy bunnies. I mean, they're doing a charity auction or a charity ball with a bunch of rich dudes. I don't know, at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday or something. Like, what the fuck is this? Is that a real thing? But whatever, man. They're raising money for the earthquake victims of whatever country or whatever. But it was just, it's purely like pure 80s excess, that scene, and it was great to see. I don't know. And to throw Chris Rock into that whole thing as well, it was just like so surreal to watch. But maybe it was just because, I don't know. Just, I didn't expect that scene, and I haven't seen the movie in a while. But everything put together, and then you throw in Chris Rock is crazy.
So we're going to transition into talking about some of the plot elements, but I just wanted to point out that this was the biggest opening weekend of 1987, and as the years go on, of course, sequels and franchises and reboots and all that jazz, they would eventually come to take over most of the box office, and that is true for a lot of the next 30 years almost, and in some ways it's really unfortunate, but in 1987, I think this just proves kind of the power of Eddie Murphy. And what makes these movies very similar is that all of them revolve around someone near Axel Foley, close to Axel Foley, visiting Beverly. It involves him visiting Beverly Hills in order to investigate a shooting of a person that Axel is close to. In this movie, the plot involves Axel investigating the shooting of his now friend, Captain Bogomil. Unlike Mikey Tandino in the original and Inspector Todd in the third movie, Bogomil survives being shot and, in fact, is promoted to Chief of Beverly Hills PD near the end of the film. And I think one of the things that really separates this movie, the reason that you know that this is a Tony Scott movie, there's a shot very early on when Bogomil is running around the oil fields and you just see that orange and that yellow that you mentioned earlier. And that's a real sign that you are dealing with a different director because it just looks and feels very different than the more comedic tone of the first one. And that lighting, again, I keep bringing up True Romance, but True Romance, also directed by Tony Scott, also a lot of which is filmed in Los Angeles. So I think you see a lot of the similar lighting, and you see a lot of magic hour, so to speak, with the sunset, and you see the lights through the blinds, and a lot of very more natural lighting. This is something that Tony Scott is known for, especially in the late 80s and early 90s. So I think that scene in particular really shows you that this is going to be something very different. And, there are scenes like that throughout the film that you just did not see in the first one. And I think it is a testament to Tony Scott as a director for just making things a little bit on the different side.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when I saw that shot and the way everything is set up. But I just, thinking about it, like I probably should go back and watch a bunch of his more of his movies because I just think of Deja Vu and I think of that green. Like, doesn't he have that green blue kind of thing going on? And then Pelham 123's got that deep blue. So he's got this color palette thing going on. I didn't really pick up on it until now, but yeah, credit to him. And unfortunately, he took his life way too soon. But that's quite unfortunate. But his list of filmographies that he's directed over the last 20, 30 years is still impressive. And it's amazing how I know all these scenes in my head, but just I've never seen the whole movie, so I think I should probably change that pretty soon. But I mean, you keep mentioning True Romance, and I keep thinking about the connections again because Bronson Pinchot was in that movie, and unfortunately he couldn't do this movie, but he comes back for the third one. But imagine if he worked on this. You know what I mean? It's just everything comes back to Perfect Strangers.
It does. Even The Leftovers, one of the greatest television dramas of all time, brought back Perfect Strangers, a show I don't believe you've seen, The Leftovers, have you?
No, but if everything comes back to Perfect Strangers, I might end up watching it down the road just by virtue of the world and everything in Destiny.
All I'm going to say is that it has perhaps the greatest payoff that you could possibly imagine to what happens when the perfect strangers disappear from Earth. And I'm not going to spoil anything that happens, but the payoff, which not only happens in season one, but you get some of it in season two and season three, is incredible.
Well, with this kind of pacing in the world going on, I might have a lot to watch anyway, so we'll see if I have time for it.
So I think I really did appreciate Brigitte Nielsen as the villain, and I know that there's a particular scene that you wanted to discuss that you really appreciated her. Dean Stockwell is also in this movie, and when I saw that he was in this movie, because I'm of course aware of the hit show that is Quantum Leap, I was expecting Dean Stockwell to quite frankly have a bigger role in this movie. And I was a little bit disappointed that he was not involved. But essentially, the biggest difference between the first movie and the second movie is that the villains are a little bit. There is a lot more clarity on what they're looking for. They are performing these various heists, and they have a specific time limit in which to do them in, and that's kind of their gimmick. The gimmick also involves letters of the alphabet, so they are extremely organized. And is it hokey? Yes. Is it something that's realistic? Probably not. Does it work for a movie like this? Absolutely.
To me, it's not even that hokey. It's just basically an insurance scam, right? They're just doing this to all these places that he actually owns, but just to collect the insurance, right? So it's not that crazy. It's just more of the extreme side of it, where you're just doing hijackings and bank robberies instead of like setting the place on fire for insurance money. But hey, he's that typical European villain played by I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. Let's just call him Jurgen. I've mentioned him before. He's the dad in Dune. He's the commander in the submarine movie Das Boot. He's been on all these other things, and once you see his face, you'll recognize him. But he does a great job as that over-the-top European villain. I thought Brigitte Nielsen as the first command, or maybe not first command. She's probably like the muscle of the group. She did a great job. I think she does these performances that, I don't know, very subtle, maybe nuance. I don't know, but this and like her in like that 5 minute role in Creed 2, I thought she did a great job in that to heighten the tension and the drama in that movie and the relationship going back with Drago. And then I don't know, I might have to watch Lady Sonia. You never know because I mean, and then there's that Conan sequel too, or maybe it's the same movie that I'm thinking of. But she's done some other stuff in the '80s, and I'm really impressed every time that I watch her. And I don't know what it is. Maybe she's got this stoic kind of look to her, because that scene you're referring to that I really liked was the one with her and Axel at the shooting gallery, and Axel's trying to flirt with her, and he's like offering to shave her legs and stuff like that. But she's kind of like no selling it, but she's doing a great job of no selling it, but also kind of having like those look in her eyes, kind of like looking at him and trying to play it cool and still be the muscle, you know what I mean? And she's like taller than him, and it creates this dynamic, and it's really interesting and entertaining. But because of her height, it creates a lot of those dynamics with a lot of different actors. So maybe it's just that intimidating factor that ties in. I don't know, but every time I watch her, man, she does a great job. Whatever kind of performance, even in Rocky 4 when she's doing that wife role and she's just kind of like being encouragement and then being the bitch at the end, like I think she does a great job, and she doesn't get enough credit. Dean Stockwell, I love Quantum Leap, man. So very surprised in that, and shout out to Blue Velvet. Am I thinking of the right movie, Blue Velvet? He was one of the weirdos in that. Am I right?
I believe so. And how could you forget Brigitte Nielsen in Creed 2 as well?
I did mention Creed too, just those 5 minutes, but like she was still great in that too. So, yeah, Dean Stockwell, man, it was weird because it seemed like the kind of role that he would play, this grimy, scrummy, dodgy, with that mustache. Great job with the mustache, but he just didn't have enough, I don't know, scenery to chew up. I guess maybe enough lines to give. He just felt like this submissive kind of dude to George, and just kind of like being scared out of his mind half the time. And he ended up getting blamed, or they ended up putting the blame as him for the alphabet murder or crimes or murders, whatever you want to call it. So he ended up becoming the patsy, unfortunately. But at least the plot of the villain side was more well thought out than the first movie.
So I think that one of the other things that you get is you get the continued chemistry between and with Detective Rosewood and Detective Taggart, as they are definitely on the same side. But the foil in this case is the new chief of police for the Beverly Hills PD. He comes off like a giant suck up to the mayor, and he has apparently fired all of the people in the department except for those three. And Rosewood and Taggart kind of have to go on their own in order to work with Axel. And I appreciated the fact that it added a new dynamic. It's kind of a plot that's been done a million times before, or up after this point, I think is when you get a lot more of these kinds of plots with a new chief of police and the way that he acts. But eventually, of course, he gets his comeuppance in the end, and I think that they're able to keep that same dynamic. And Eddie Murphy does a little bit more of the Bugs Bunny act, and I think it just works. I think having that chemistry there, I think, is just what works. And they don't they change the dynamic in such a way that I think it's good. That I think they kind of take Bogomil out of it and they create the new drama with the chief of police. So I think it's just fresh enough to add a new dynamic without completely ruining what made the first movie so good.
Yeah, that chief of police Donald Trump, just firing everybody, taking credit for everyone else's success, and being totally incompetent. Yeah, that sounds very familiar. So, just saying. But yeah, he did his job for the shitty commissioner that's supposed to have those walls in the way of the heroes, and it makes sense. So I get that it's a trope, we've seen it before, is what it is. At least it was different from the first one. You know what I mean? So at least they took that and did it a little differently, and then everything kind of changes at the end when you got that guy from Boogie. Did you notice it was the guy from Boogie Nights, the Colonel from Boogie Nights at the end?
I did not notice that. No.
Oh yeah, that was the Colonel, the fucking pedo from Boogie Nights. But yeah, just more strange connections with obscure actors. But yeah, I like how he got fired at the end. That was pretty funny. In terms of the relationships, like I said, like I liked the third act of the first one a lot because they're working together. You know what I mean? This is what I got in the second one. I love that dynamic a lot. So I love that they gave Judge Reinhold more funny lines and they gave more character. They talk about Taggart's divorce and give him more of a background. So I love that they get more into the relationships and the fact that they also establish the fact that they've been communicating and become friends over the last 3-4 years since the first movie. So they got that built in. So the hollow relationships that you had in the first one are not so hollow in this one. Now you have actual friendships that have stakes. You know what I mean? Because you know what their past is and how much of a friendship they do have. You see that with they even got a connection with the daughter of the chief that was shot. So that was interesting. All things considering, that they got that close in such a short amount of time, even though he's in Detroit. So I like that they did that. So it just works because they put the work in the first one. If you just kind of work on that in the second one and work on that dynamic, it's easy and you just build on that. So it felt like that dynamic to write with was kind of easier because they did the groundwork in the first one. So.
Yeah, I think that they did do a lot of the groundwork, and they were able to kind of build upon some things in this second movie. And I don't know, maybe this is because of the Tony Scott influence and the way that he writes and the way that he directs. But uh, Rosewood is a psychopath, right?
I don't know. I went to the mall when it was open recently, when it was, barely open just to see. I had gloves on and a mask on, by the way. So I was walking by and there's this new store in the mall and it's got like a bunch of weapons, you know what I mean? Like swords, weapons, that kind of shit, cosplay stuff. And I'm just thinking like, okay, I guess people are into this kind of thing still. You know what I mean? And then when I watched this, I was like, God, this is what, 87? He would have gone right to that store right here in 2020 and bought some shit. So I think it's just a common thing that just dudes, probably, most likely, I would say 90% if I were to guess. I hate to say that, but they have this weird obsession with weapons, man, and Rambo and Stallone and all that shit. And I don't know, maybe they're just making fun of it because the original was supposed to be, like I said, we mentioned before, was Stallone, so tongue in cheek. But I would say no, because at least in the third one, he's shown signs of like just being competent and normal. So
Also a new director. It is worth pointing out that we will get our third director for the third movie as well, which we will uh, discuss more next week. And I think again, just coming back to this idea of the action and the look, I think that's what really makes this movie work and what makes it so good. And I think a very competent sequel relative to the first one. And I think that there are elements of this that don't work as well. I don't think the movie is nearly as funny. You do get a couple scenes of Eddie Murphy hamming it up and doing his impersonations and weaseling his way into the house, for example. And you see him again at the beginning undercover. So you do see some of that, but you don't see it as much. And I think that's unfortunately what you lose when you get a more action oriented director, is that you're going to get a more action oriented movie. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for some people. I think some people probably like this movie more for that reason, but I happen to think that what made the first one work so well was the comedy. And maybe it's hard to capture that lightning in a bottle, so you really have to just do different things. And the other thing is there was a lot more Paul Reiser. Perhaps this was influenced by the fact that Paul Reiser was in Aliens, the sequel to Alien, and I don't want to say he was a breakout, but he definitely had a bigger role in that movie, and thus he has a bigger role in this movie. And it seems like they were trying to get way too much comedy out of his situation and the car and having the broken leg at the end. And that seemed to be where they were trying to place a lot of their comedy, and it didn't work as well. And maybe part of this is I'm not a huge Paul Reiser fan. I think he's a bit annoying when he's trying to be comedic, and I'm not a big fan of Mad About You, so that may be coloring my feelings on his performance in this movie. But yeah, I think that because this movie was not as funny, and you also get a lot of the comedy focused around Paul Reiser, I think those are a couple things that don't necessarily work for me.
Paul Reiser stuff still kind of works for me. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the small amounts you get him in at a time. I don't know. I thought it was real. I was laughing at his stupid accent. I'm like, what the fuck kind of accent is he doing right now? And I was like, why are you setting up a meeting? Or like, what are you talking? And then you find out he's just conning his boss. But again, one of those little plot hole things, conning your boss at some kind of interview meeting at 9 a.m., calling him at 5 a.m. Come on, that bad timing. But still, you know what I mean? It's comedy stuff. And then I did like him grabbing the phone and then not knowing what to do because his boss came in. So he was like, "What do I do?" I put the phone, and then he keeps going back with the phone, and then he goes under the table. I thought that was interesting. But I get what you're saying. It's because of the aliens thing. No doubt about it in my mind. I mean, Aliens was a huge hit, so and they realized they had him in the first movie. Well, we got to get more to do, and I get that. So, um, yeah, it was fine. That's fine. For me, the stuff that didn't work is more or less the plot stuff again. Like the first one had these really crazy, hollow relationships and just weird, plot devices and stuff like that, and generic European bad guy. Again, they went with it here, but they just kind of heightened it up with the performances and stuff like that. So, because like the idea, I mean, like I said, I do like the idea of just kind of using the insurance thing and just collecting the insurance and then blaming it on this Patsy guy. But there's just some other stuff that didn't, it was like, how come they didn't shoot the dude in the face? You know what I mean? Like, even the bad guy was like, "You failed at doing the one thing. Like, we wanted to kill the guy. That's the commissioner at the beginning of the movie, and they fucked up because they didn't aim for the fucking head, like Thor and fucking Thanos. So, I was just thinking, like, God, that would have been, I don't know. To me, you shoot at the head, and then just, it's done. And then they wouldn't have to worry about this bullshit. So to me, that was kind of like a big plot hole for me. Like Brigitte Nielsen should have just shot him in the head. I mean, she was 2 feet away. What? Well, I don't know. So that kind of didn't gel well with me. The Playboy Mansion stuff, like I said, it was funny, but like, God, did we really need to go to the Playboy Mansion? You know what I mean? It's just like, what can we do with this extra budget? You know what I mean? So when movies kind of excess on that in the sequel, you kind of forgive them a little bit about it. Unforgivable with some sequels when they do that, but sometimes, is what it is. Um, but at least they had the good direction with it. So that's kind of my take on it. Like I said, it's more of like plot stuff, but everything else was great. The casting, the performances, even Judge Reinhold got more to do, and I thought he did great in this one. Probably the best out of all three.
Yeah, I would say this is my favorite Judge Reinhold performance of the three movies. And Brian, when you have a chance to go to the Playboy Mansion, that's something that I think a lot of people would take advantage of, especially in 1987, Brian, because as you know, we're talking about the Playboy Mansion in the 80s. That's a lot of cocaine.
Yeah, it makes me think that Rick James came along with him, but probably he was already there stashed in the closet.
I mean, I don't think Eddie Murphy is notoriously anti-drug, so I don't think it was him necessarily, but man alive. What a movie, what a time to be alive. And of course, we have another blonde. It's Bogomil's daughter this time, played by a different actor. Still no romance for Axel. She interacts with Axel a number of times. Still nothing.
How old is she supposed to be? Kind of.
I mean, I don't know, but Axel Foley can't be very old either. I mean, he's probably in his mid-20s at this point.
I was under this weird impression she was like 16 or something, but I don't know. I don't know.
To me, she came across as being a little bit older, but you may be right on that. But just the way that some of the scenes were written, it's almost like they were trying to tease some sort of a romantic angle with it. I don't know. Maybe I completely misread it. That is very possible.
I was kind of reading uncle kind of relationship. Like I said, maybe they met when she was younger. I don't know. I don't want to go down some certain roads that are not there. So
I just want Axel Foley to get some loving, man. That's all I want.
it's gonna be 7 years till 1994.
All right, let's talk about the MVP. For me, so I differentiated this time. I think performance, it's still Eddie Murphy. He's still easily the selling point of this movie. It's why it was number one at the box office. I think that is incredibly obvious, but I think this time you get a big upgrade in the direction of this movie with Tony Scott creating the look, creating a lot of the action, and really just making this feel like a different movie in some ways. You have a lot of the same elements, a lot of the same characters, but just enough different to really make this feel like it's its own movie, as opposed to simply being a rehash of the first one. So for me, my MVP is Tony Scott. Best performance, Eddie Murphy.
I have to agree. I almost went with the cinematographer again because I have this kind of thing for cinematographers. I kind of try to give him the love, but it's definitely Tony Scott because not only did he have the eye, he's got this feel, man, and he brings out the colors, like I said, and he knows he brings out a certain look to a movie that because it makes it distinctive. You know what I mean? Like True Romance has that distinctive look. This has a distinctive look. Crimson Tide has that very distinctive look of everyone wearing hats. You know what I mean? It's like he does these things very well as a director, and it's hard to do because for some directors, it's hard to describe a style. You know what I mean? Like Martin Brest, I would really be hard to describe a style because it's kind of like drama, comedy, kind of all over the place kind of thing. Tony Scott, you know what you're getting, and it's a very distinctive style. So I'm glad that the timing was right. Top Gun was at the right time. 1 year later, Beverly Hills Cop 2, everything was right. And of course, best performance, Eddie Murphy. No doubt about it. Not even close. As much as I love Brigitte Nielsen in this movie, still Eddie Murphy, man, was just a one-man show at points in this movie.
For sure. So it's always unfortunate when Brian and I agree. It makes for a little bit less interesting conversation, but I think it's pretty obvious that in this specific case, the MVP and performance were fairly obvious. And when we talk next week about Beverly Hills Cop 3, I think it's gonna be a little bit more of a struggle, but we will save that for next week. So like I said, I think Beverly Hills Cop 2 is a step down from the first one, but I still think that there are a number of extremely entertaining moments and entertaining scenes throughout this movie. One of the ones that we didn't mention is the scene when Axel is in the pool and he's telling Taggart to get in the pool. And you know, of course, how it's going to pay off. The Taggart is going to end up in the water, all soaking wet, and that is, of course, what happens, Brian. Because just like birthday cakes in wrestling, in movies, if you are standing by a pool, somebody is going to go into the pool with clothes on. It's just a rule.
For the record, he did not hijack a house. He borrowed it? Axel? I don't know. Whatever. They came back and everything was fine. They were fine. I guess the construction got delayed. That's it.
That is it. So, Brian, any final thoughts before we end the show for this week?
Um, we kind of, we mentioned the bad sequels and comedies, but, this one kind of rises to the occasion. So, definitely worth owning. Um, I wouldn't say buy the trilogy based on what we say next week, because I was very almost convinced to buy the whole trilogy, but then I got this, discussion with you. It's like, fuck, I'll be stuck with the third one. What the fuck am I going to do with that disc? So I would buy them separately, but they're definitely worth owning one and two. Like, and I hardly say that about sequels. It's like you would never say that about Caddyshack 2. You know what I mean? But definitely own Beverly Hills Cop 2. I think it's worth owning in the collection.
Definitely, I think that it is a perfectly fine companion to the first one, and if you are looking to watch more Tony Scott, definitely worth recommending and watching. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. We will talk to you again next week for Beverly Hills Cop 3.
Did you notice Paul Reiser was watching Saturday night's main event, the one with Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant in that Battle Royal, meaning that was March of 1987?